What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court for today, January 26, 2024. I am Sean Murphy alongside Mr. Hollywood himself, the man, the myth, the legend, Jeff Iafredi. Jeff, long time no see, my friend. So good to see you. Great to have you back on the pod. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. It feels good to be back. I missed you, Sean. I know we've been talking, but to do content again with you, this is what I want. You could check me out also on Crunch Time with Jeff and Booner.
Yes.
It's just something, a little something just to pay for the jet fuel money. It's just something I'm doing on the side. But in all seriousness, though, I'm so happy to be here. And let's roll, man. I'm excited. I haven't been able to talk Pistons. I haven't been able to watch anything this week. I've been so wrapped up in stuff. So it feels good. It feels good to be here.
I'm glad you brought that up. If you're tuning in, if you haven't heard what's gone on with my boy Jeff of late, he actually is starting his own venture and going specifically to Crunch Time with Jeff Iafredi and Booner. You could also catch Lucas Klotz on there as well. You guys make absolutely great content together. Obviously, you know, a lot of your time, you know, together on the Morning Woodward show, but now people can find, you know, you guys doing your own thing, running it, and honestly hitting up the independent scene, and we're just ready to take over Detroit, man. So Jeff, I'm excited for you. You're going to catch me on this channel here occasionally too. Jeff can't keep me out.
Yep.
So
that's a fact.
Yeah,
that is a fact.
100%, man. You're going to have a lot of fun. I'm really happy for you. Anything else you want to mention about the channel or about the podcast? Any potential plans you guys have coming up? Any, like, what time people can catch you guys at?
Actually, perfect. You just asked that. We're getting a time slot together. I think it's going to be 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. weekdays. So it'll be more of a night show. It just works better with everyone's schedule. We'll have content posted throughout the day, video at 10 a.m., video at 4 p.m., and then we'll go live 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. So that's the schedule. You can follow it. Official CT pod and all social media, official Crunch Time pod on Instagram as well. But yeah, we're ready to go, man. I'm fired up. We'll have Sean Murphy on there. We'll have some From Half Court, Crunch Time, Jeff and Booner collabs.
Heck yeah, man.
Things on the way, people. So stay tuned for that.
Heck yeah, man. And not only that, but also we're going to be making more content here as well. So you're going to want to make sure that you're subscribed to this channel as well, because there's a whole lot of stuff not only happening with the Pistons, there's a lot of stuff happening in the NBA, and we're going to have to talk a lot about it. Before we get to the Pistons, I have to talk really quickly about this like crazy experience that I had. Jeff, I know I told you like kind of like a little bit in passing, but earlier this week, the Pistons played the Milwaukee Bucks at home, and it seemed like, you know, like another like normal game. I got to go cover it in person. It was fun and all that. But Adrian Griffin the next day turned out to be relieved of his coaching duties, which is, you know, normally that's like a pretty surprising thing when that happens in the middle of the season. I was front row for his pregame press conference, not even 24 hours before he was released. And then the other coach I've seen that's an away coach this year, Jeff, Wes Unseld Jr. So my question to you is this: am I the Grim Reaper? I mean, I know I'm pale, but like, does that make me like the coach's great? Like, if they see me, should they be scared?
Well, yes, they should. I bet Adrian Griffin was at that press conference. He was probably talking to the media, and he keeps looking at the corner of his eye. He's like, "Wait, is that Sean Murphy?" And then he leaves and he gets a phone call and he's like, "Damn it, I knew it. It's Sean Murphy." It is the most, and you're right, this typically does not happen, and especially when you have the second best record in the Eastern Conference. So
30-13.
Yeah, when a decision like this happens, I mean, could it be because you played 2 close games to the Pistons? I don't know.
I mean, I'll say this much, you know, everything from the sounds of it sounds like you know, that locker room was not his at that point. And, you know, just from being there in person, I can tell you that this is not the same Bucks team on the defensive side of the ball. We talked about it when the move actually happened I wonder if this could actually kind of be like an undoing of the Bucks, because it's going to make them so different defensively. And I mean, they've just been a shell of themselves on that side of the floor ever since Dame came over. And now, not even like 48 hours after they released Adrian Griffin, Doc Rivers is now the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. Before we, you know, get into like Pistons trade deadlines, just really quickly, Jeff, what are your thoughts about Doc Rivers being the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks? On paper, it makes sense.
Nailed it. That's where I was going. On paper, it makes sense. Doc Rivers to me is like a little cockroach that, you know, he's crawling around. You keep stepping on him and he just won't die. You're like, what? This guy is just he's still fighting back. Like Doc Rivers is still finding a way to get another head coaching gig, even though he has the most blown 3-1 leads in NBA history. But for real, if you're looking for a proven head coach, he's obviously Doc Rivers. He's won an NBA championship, and you're a Bucks. You have veterans in the locker room, players to some extent like Doc Rivers. That's been his reputation. But is it the right move? I don't know. And to be honest, if Adrian Griffin can lose a locker room and they're still second in the Eastern Conference, at the end of the day, how much do you? It's not like Doc Rivers needs to come in here and fix everything. He just can't mess it up. So maybe he's the right one for the job. But bringing in Doc Rivers to be your head coach doesn't make me even more confident in the Bucks, if that makes sense. It's just kind of okay.
Yeah, I posted this when it happened. This pretty much sums up my thoughts. Well, did it work for those people? No, it never does. I mean, these people somehow delude themselves into thinking it might, but it might work for us.
Like, yeah,
that's how I feel. It's like, Doc Rivers is one of the greatest coaches in the history of basketball. He does have a great resume. He has won a lot of games, but when you start to look at the reality that it is now 16 years since he won his last championship with the Boston Celtics in 2008, it is 2024. And now the only playoff streaks that we know him for are for Game 7 losses and 3-1 leads blown. Yeah. So I hope that doesn't happen in Milwaukee. I hope they also give him more than this season to figure it out. I know they signed him on a few-year deal, so they probably can't fire another coach and be paying 4 at the same time. But at the same time, when you have Giannis in house and if he doesn't like what's happening, they pretty clearly will make changes if they have to.
Yeah, and I guess if you have a Damian Lillard, Giannis, 2 veteran guys in this league, at least at this point, you want to bring in a guy that's coached in this league. Now he's been passed around more than a blunt, but still that's a whole different story, right? I mean, he's like you said, I think that tweet perfectly summarizes it. Like, and this is a thing that happens across all sports. Like, one coach will still be getting fired, rehired, rehired, and a team will actually believe, well, maybe it'll be different with us. Maybe it'll be different with us, but we won't actually know. This move, to me, you won't know how significant it is or if it worked, to me, into the postseason. Like, that's when you're going to judge Doc Rivers, and you're going to look back and be like, did they blow another 3-1 lead? Did they lose another Game 7? Or did they make the NBA Finals? We'll find out.
Yeah. I mean, everything we were hearing out of this camp, like all year long, is not great things. And, definitely when you're not winning convincingly and, trailing for a good part of the games against, a Pistons team that only has 5 wins at this point, that is obviously something that people in the league are going to talk about. Speaking of those Pistons in those only 5 wins, Jeff, they have gotten 3 of them in the last month or so. So they've more than doubled their win total. Has any other team in the league done that? Thought not. Nope. That's history right there. But in all seriousness, it was obviously a historically terrible start to the season. So you could really only go up from where they were, but they have been playing better basketball over like the last month. If there are, like, obviously I'm sure you're far more grinded to Lions football right now as a lot of people are, because the great run that they're on. But what have you been noticing, like, when you have been tuning into Pistons games? What have you liked? And are there still things that you look at as, okay, there is still some building blocks here, there are still things that I'm optimistic about?
Well, for me, and I've been consistent with this, at least if you look at the core foundation of players, I like the core right now. When you have, a trade go down that welcomes in a Muscala and a Gallinari, and you find out that Muscala is actually, Marvin Bagley goes to Washington, but you find out Muscala and his ability to stretch the floor has actually benefited this team, and you find out how much they needed spacing. It kind of gives you an idea of where they should go in the future. Like, this team desperately needs spacing. They need star talent. And I know the trade deadline conversation, it's been centered around Zach Lavine, which we'll get to in a little bit. But for me, it's just these guys continuing to take the next step. This season's already lost. We knew that from the first 15 games. You know what I like about sample sizes? You can use it to support any argument. I could say that the Pistons over the last 5 games are 2-3. I could say that, but then we just ignore the other, a chunk of games. But the last 5 games are 2-3. And I think bringing in veterans that understand how to play the game of basketball, they can space the floor. And you have Jaden Ivey, who's essentially taken on the role of being the guy with Cade out. It helps. Now, the thing you have to figure out is when Cade gets back, him and Jaden Ivey being able to play on the court together, that thing needs to continue to gel. But again, who knows? I mean, the trade deadline, ideally I'd like to keep your core foundation of players, but at the end of the day, like we talked about this before the podcast, the Pistons don't really have any leverage. Like if you're going to go get somebody, you're going to have to lose a key foundational part of this team, a young player that you drafted within a year or two ago. So that's the reality of the situation they're in. I like the pieces they have, but there's so much work to do. And this trade deadline is one of the more important recent trade deadlines in Pistons history, man, and the offseason too. Because we could talk about the money all we want, but Troy, we compliment him in the past for his ability to wheel and deal. He's going to have to wheel and deal pretty impressively to save at least the fan base, to keep them bought in.
And cap flexibility is great, but it's about how you use it. It's about how you utilize the space that you've given yourself. And when you are a team, especially when you're in a city like Detroit, let's be honest, it's not a glamour market in the NBA. These players want to be living, in like South Beach or, Los Angeles, places like that. You either have to overpay someone, to, slightly in order to, sway them to go to a situation like Detroit, or you have to trade for and acquire contracts, players that have long-term agreements, a guy like a Zach Lavine. And, currently where we're at, as far as the trade deadline right now, obviously, there was the promise that the Pistons would, be aggressive, that to improve the roster and to take things, like in a better direction. And obviously, if that's only the Marvin Bagley, Isaiah Livers trade, then I think there would be some disappointment. But from the sounds of it, the Pistons are pretty active. And, the most likely candidate has kind of been all along, but also kind of remains to be, reportedly, Zach Lavine. And it sounds like there's kind of, a situation right now where a deal could potentially be done if agreements are made, but ultimately one of the sides are going to have to end up giving in. Either the Bulls are going to have to accept that Detroit is not going to be willing to give up one of those 4 prospects in order to get Zach Lavine, and then they just compromise and surround it around something different. Or Detroit has to decide if it's worth giving up one of those guys in order to pull the trigger. I don't see that happening, and I personally think it would be a mistake if they did. And just to be clear, those 4 players are Cade Cunningham, Asar Thompson, Jaden Ivey, and Jalen Duren. But if you could get Zach Lavine around something that, was surrounding, say, a Bojan Bogdanovic, a James Wiseman, and like your pick this upcoming summer, because let's be honest, this is one of the worst drafts in recent memory. So I'm not sure how much I necessarily value that pick, even if it is top 3.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm over the taking another top 5 pick. I think at this point you got to get proven talent. Now, ideally, it would be another wing, and we've talked about this ad nauseum on this podcast. Like, you need a wing, preferably a 4, that could come in, be a respectable 3-point shooter, be able to defend, be able to play both sides of the court. And I don't know who that is. That's really the question, because you only can acquire guys that are available. And Zach Lavine's been the one that the Pistons have been the most interested in. Now, what does a Zach Lavine do to move the needle? I don't know. And what is he if he comes to this team? He'd immediately be your second. On some nights, it'd be your first option, which isn't ideal. I would say. I think if you're in a position where Zach Lavine could maybe be your third option, that's great, right? He's the guy that can get you 20 a game. We know Zach Lavine because every time he plays the Pistons, for some reason he gets 50, 30, and that's probably why Troy's like, yeah, we want this guy a part of our organization. But I just don't want the Pistons to get, and maybe they're already there, but Troy to get to a point where they start making moves out of desperation just to keep the fans bought in, and you start to regret this thing a couple months down the line. Because Zach Lavine, let's be real here, availability is a big question mark. Mm-hmm. That's always been a big thing with Zach Lavine. I like Zach Lavine, but he's not getting any younger. And he is a pure scorer. He is. But what does he do for this franchise currently right now? Does he move the needle? Yes. But by how much? And what do you have to give up? Of one of your foundational players like a Jaden Ivey, for example, who is still developing and still can reach those heights. Number one, way younger, a lot more potential. And I get the 3-point shooting is a problem, which I would agree with that. And Zach Lavine is a much better 3-point shooter. But I don't want Troy to make moves out of desperation. There's a balance, Sean, between making a move out of desperation, but you need to get something done. Like it's a near impossible thing he has to accomplish. But man, I just don't know if Zach Lavine's the answer. I don't. And I love this team to improve, but man, at what cost? At what cost?
And I think it comes back to this, we said it, a couple months ago. This just feels very similar to when the Pistons, decided to make the Blake Griffin trade. It's a very similar risk of a guy who is, who is an all-star caliber talent, who we
Right.
have seen, have the ability to take over games, to, to be a really effective player, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, Jeff, you and I both saw him drop 50
Oh
earlier
my
this year.
gosh.
I mean, like the guy can just score effortlessly and take over a game. We know that. And, I absolutely think he could be electric. But like you said, the availability, is a question in particular just over this year. Now, like now last season, he played 77 games. The year before that, 67. So over the last few years, his availability has been a little bit better. It's really just been kind of like the more towards like kind of the beginning of his career where it was a little bit more of an issue. But it would kind of be similar to Blake, where he's not getting younger. I mean, he's 28 right now, and he still has like 3 years left on his contract where you're paying him quite a bit. To me, Jeff, where the difference would be between when we traded for Blake Griffin and if we traded for Zach Lavine is if Zach Lavine came in, it's not like he's going to be surrounded by Reggie Jackson and Andre
Absolutely.
Drummond and a ton of whoever else, is on the team. Reggie Bullock was our best 3-point shooter, but even then, I think he was traded. That's besides the point. He would be coming in with Cade, with Ivy, with Duran, with on paper a more talented roster around him. On the other hand, I mean that team's only won 5 games. So how dramatically better, to your point, is it actually going to be? I mean, it would not be their final move by any means. They would have to really flesh it out in the offseason.
Yeah, and your point about Blake Griffin, obviously Blake never had a Cade Cunningham, which it's a guy that's going to give you 22, 6, and 6 on any given night. And him and Zach Lavine would be a hell of a backcourt. It truly would be. Now, what do you do at the 4 spot? Tobias Harris, like whoever that is, like that's to me more of a concern. Just with how Ivy's been playing. Like I know if efficiency has to improve, but still, and maybe I'm crazy, but I still have a lot of faith in what Ivy can still become. So for me, it's about just letting
He's been
him run
playing
free.
really well of
Yeah,
late.
and just letting him run free. I don't want to, intrude in that. Now, Lavine as a player, right, a pure scorer next to Cade, it works. But to me, Sean, it's about who's playing the 4 spot, and can we get somebody that can be that type of scorer like Zach Lavine is, but just at the 4 spot. And now,
Yeah.
who is that? Is it a guy in Jeremy Grant? I don't know who it is. But to me, that's more of a problem. That's more of a need than just going out and getting another guard. That's
Yeah.
not that great of a defender anyway. Like that's
Yeah.
my opinion on it. But
And I
again, if they
think
make a move for Zach, I'm not going to sit here and be mad about it because they need star talent.
right. And I mean, really, if you're looking at what the actual options are going to be for getting, that type of 4, because again, those types of players are at a premium, right? They're generally
Right.
either, like they're generally either like star players that are at the top of the draft, which, doesn't really look like at this current point. I mean, who knows? There could be some breakout candidates in the tournament or whatever, but as of right now, there's not really that type of player. So you can't really look at the draft. So really the only ways that you can really look at it are like either through the trade market or free agency. Any team that's worth a damn right now is not giving up that type of player. So really your only hope is a guy that's going to be available in free agency. And to me, it is going to be a guy like Tobias Harris. To me, would be the best option. I know another player that's talked about a lot as well is Mikal Bridges as a potential option. But in my opinion, Jeff, just with some of the off the court related things, and also just I haven't been fully convinced by his play this year either. It's not like the play on the court justifies the potential distractions and things that you bring that are off the court. Like I'm sorry, I meant Miles Bridges, not Mikal Bridges.
Yep.
Um,
Miles.
yep, Miles Bridges. So, ultimately that's where my question lies with that. What would your thoughts be?
And in me and Kool-Aid had this conversation too about Miles Bridges, and I'm past the character thing. Like I know at the beginning we talked a lot about it, and it was are things off the court going to affect what's happening on the court? Dude, like the Pistons, they're at an all-time low right now. You need guys that can put the ball in the basket, and Miles Bridges can do that. Like even coming off the suspension, him being banished for a while, he comes back and he's a 20-point scorer. Like.
Right.
You need like if you told me right now that a Miles Bridges deal got done, I'm the first to be like, you know what? Let's ride. I love it. I absolutely love it. Now, you could argue, well, Miles Bridges being closer to home. I get all of that stuff, but I think Miles Bridges would be a slam dunk to me. You bring in a guy that immediately provides athleticism. He said he's going to give you 20 points. He's efficient, by the way. And I think he adds another dimension to what this team could do, especially with Cade throwing him lobs. I think it'd be exciting. So I'm all for Miles Bridges. I made that very clear. I know at the beginning it was more, is it worth it? But at this point, Sean, it's DEFCON 5. Like, you bring in help. And if Miles Bridges is available, sign me up. It's that simple.
Yeah, I think to your point, it is kind of a question at this point of whether or not they can afford to not bring in that type of talent, especially, since it is not available very, very wide, throughout the league. I know Pascal Siakam was a guy that they really wanted, but we saw very quickly how much of a market there was for him and for OG Anunoby, and even guys like Lauri Markkanen, like there are everyone is trying, is really trying to compete right now because everyone sees how much parity there really is. And it's like, there's more teams that are good right now than there ever has been. But as a result, it feels like it's like those teams at the bottom, like us, like the Spurs, like the Wizards. It feels like the teams that are bad are worse than ever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how, like, the Pistons, the Wizards, the Spurs, it's not just bad, it's horrendous. It's not even double-digit wins at this point. So, yeah.
Well, and part of it, like, you're seeing a lot less, like, I know load management was a big topic before the season. I think the Pistons have proven that load management has been much less of a thing this season because during that losing streak, teams, in theory, would have all the right in the world, to sit guys out. I mean, it still exists to some extent throughout the league, but, like, players are much less likely to sit out in those random games. And even if they do, they still leave enough stars and enough talent in the lineup to where it's still going to be a long 2.5 hours.
Yep. Yeah, that's just how it's going to have to be. And it's funny because you see what happened to Adrian Griffin with the Bucks, and then you look at Wes Unseld, and he just moves right up into the front office, and they've stunk. And then Adrian Griffin's like, "See you later."
Yep.
Sayonara.
Yep.
And then Monty Williams. That man, I don't think and people want to blame Monty, go ahead. I don't think he understood how bad it would be. Like, right. No way he knew. Like, he understood it was going to be a long process. It would take some time for these guys. But I wonder what kind of toll this has on him. Yeah. On him to have to get these guys like him. And you've been in these press conferences. I can't imagine after the winless months, him going to the press conference and he has to answer the media every single loss. Mm-hmm. Like, my gosh, it's like a broken record.
Yeah, I know there's people, I know there's people online, that talk about, Monty's just there to collect a check, like he doesn't care. That is so far, from the case. I have seen that man fired up. And passionate, and he is very dedicated to trying to figure this out. To your point, like, yeah, it absolutely has to take a toll on a coach, especially a guy who, not even 3 years ago was in the NBA finals,
right. And I think at this point he recognizes, like, this team needs a Chris Paul. Like, this team needs a Chris Paul. Like, this team needs, like, and maybe not that direct play, but somebody to come in and be like, all right, guys, relax.
And honestly, it feels like Monte Morris, like, has a chance to, like, be that guy for at least, part of the season. He was someone that was going to be counted on, very much so at the beginning of the year, in the lineup. And I mean, he only played in, like, I believe it was like 11 minutes or 15 minutes in his first game, but he was either 3 or 3 or 4 or 4 from the field. He made his first shot from beyond the arc. And, the thing about him is, he is such a good playmaker, but is historically great at not turning the ball over. Like not just like good at, like, he is literally he has one of the all-time best assist to turnover ratios in the league. Minimum 1,000 assists. Mm-hmm. So this guy can absolutely come in and fill that need. And it's like Mike Muscala and Danilo Gallinari. It's like, it's not like those guys are world beaters, but you know what the honest difference is when you notice those guys are on the court? You can rely on them on both ends. Unlike when you have James Wiseman on the court, as much of a talent as, he people thought he could be at one point. He's so inconsistent as a rim protector and can be taken advantage of so easily. And even
Yeah.
when he gets the ball on the offensive end, it can be sporadic in a lot of cases. Whereas Muscala and Gallinari, they know what to do when they get the ball. And in fact, when they get the ball, their job, shoot that damn thing.
Yeah.
Which is
They do
something
it.
that this team needs. And it's like, not that they're world beaters, but damn it, they just have the threat.
And that was, to me, was the biggest sign how desperately this team needs more of those guys, right? And
Mhm.
I think calling them adults would maybe be a little disrespectful, but they are really just adults, like guys
Oh,
that just
yes.
that get how to play the game, right? Gallinari, Muscala, Morris, guys that have played at in this league for a while, and they understand it. Like, you're running around, it's like a chicken running around with his head cut off. And now you got Monty Morris, who, like you said, historically great at taking care of the ball. Muscala and Gallinari, who get their roles, they're pros, they're pros,
Yep.
and it just slows everything else down for everybody else. Like, right when
Yep.
you have Jay Ivey out there, no Cade Cunningham, and you got a bunch of youth all around him, he's running, he's going, and this goes back to what Dwayne said. He talked about, he's got to turn the 90% down to about 60%. What he's going at 150%. So now you got guys that are like, all right, relax, we're
Yep.
okay. And Monty
Yep.
Morris is back. His impact is very visible. So you're absolutely right. They need more adults, but not just that, guys that understand their role and can excel in their role. And it's so bad. Like, if Mike Muscala and Gallinari can really be even a 1% of a difference, it shows you how bad this team really needs guys like that. Obviously better players, but
Yeah.
that shows something.
It just shows how massive of a difference it is when you have a roster that fits around what you're, like what you
Right.
actually have in
Spacing.
house. We knew at the beginning of the season that this team was reluctant to, to make a lot of moves because they wanted to see what they had around Cade Cunningham and how to best build it going forward.
Mhm.
Well, I think we saw very quickly, and I think anyone could have made the judgment that he needs shooting around him. Playmakers in order to space the floor, the best thing to utilize that with is shooting. I think we all knew that was a thing that this team needed. But I think we underestimated just how much, this roster did truly need some form of a shakeup or some different voices or just something, just different in the rotation. Because even like you said, just those two role players have just drastically flipped the energy of the team.
Right.
And it feels like they're granted, it's only a 5-game, sample size. They're 2-3 in those last 5 games. They look like a much more competitive team than they did a month ago.
Yeah. And spacing is everything, especially when you get a guy like Cade Cunningham, who's such an elite playmaker, and you have Jaden Ivey, who with the way he plays the game, again, creating shots for others, Jalen Duren, Asard Thompson, which, the shot, well, it'll come around hopefully eventually, but you still need more spacing, a ton more spacing. I mean, the guys they have currently in house, like I said earlier about the Muscala and Gallinari thing, how much of an upgrade they are, getting them from Marvin Bagley in terms of spacing the floor. Like, dude, that should tell you right there how bad this team needs more 3-point shooting. Now, people would bring up the IVK dynamic and how Ivy's regressed a little bit as a 3-point shooter, but we've seen him at points in time for a consistent period of time be upwards of a 34% 3-point shooter. He can be respectable, right? And Cade Cunningham and his shots, he's improved. So even though they're shooting high volume, but they do need spacing. It's everything in this league, man. That's how teams succeed, right? You build around your star players. You get guys that know their role. It's kind of like the thing over in Miami they do every year. They don't have star power everywhere, but they got guys that know their role. They got guys that can knock down shots, and they have Eric Spoelstra, of course, but still guys that get the role and can hit 3-point shots. This team has lacked it all year. Spacing has been a consistent problem, and just getting in 2 guys that at this point in their career, I wouldn't say washed, but they're getting there. They're basically washed.
They're competent.
The fact that they're making an impact like they are tells you how bad they need more 3-point shooters. Bad, consistent 3-point shooters too. Alec Burks has been. That's why I've always said, Alec Burks, he better not leave. I want Alec Burks here until he's cooked, because he can space, he can hit threes, he can create his own shot. He's such in Bojan. I know he's probably going to be traded as well, but those guys, and preferably Bojan coming off your bench if he doesn't get traded, but he's going to be traded this trade deadline. Those guys are how you build this thing.
Yep.
And you got to keep acquiring talent like that. Now you need better defenders, but still, 3-point shooting is everything in today's NBA. It's everything.
Yep. And from the sounds of it, like and again, a lot of these reports, come from our guy James Edwards III. Shout out to the work he does. Go check out the
Great.
Athletic and read a lot of the stuff that he does. But one of the points he brought up was as regards to Bogdanovich and Alec Burks, the Pistons are, they're more willing, or they might be more willing to give them up than they were a year ago. They might be more of a position to accept an offer. It doesn't sound like they're actively shopping each player either, which to me, in my opinion, makes sense because I understand, like people wanting us to maximize the assets that we can get out of these players. And that's why I do think, to your point, like more than likely, I think Bojan will be traded just because he does have value. And I do think that if you add him to, say, a Philadelphia right now with another like key role player, that could push them over the hump to be a finals team. There are teams where I think Bojan could go in, and if he's their sixth man, even if Oklahoma just said we don't want to overcommit, but still want to like see if we can make a run, Bojan as their sixth man would be like incredible. And it's like I know people are like hearing like, oh well, the Pistons want a good player and a first round pick for Bojan. That's ridiculous. I think people are putting too much stress on a good player. If they can get like a serviceable young player who has like some form of upside and then like a lower like first round pick for Bojan, that's decent value. So, but even then, I understand not wanting to give up your best shooting when we talk about how important that is and how much you need it on the team.
Yeah, and ideally, and I just want to say this too. We talked about this last trade deadline. I think that was the year to trade Bojan. I do. Last trade deadline, that was like the Lakers wanted him, and I think teams wanted him. And the argument I had is he's not getting any younger. Like his value is at an all-time high. He was available. He was playing. He's playing at a high level. They needed to trade him last trade deadline, but now we're here, and now you're in a point where it's like, okay, you don't have much to give up. He is the piece if you're going to give up a piece. Yep. But then you face that battle of, would it be better if we kept him and he was our sixth man? Like, can you afford for a team that's won single-digit games to get rid of a guy who's one of your best? He's your best 3-point shooter and one of your best players.
Yep.
You're in a tough predicament because he is your only really a bargaining chip that you have that you're able to give up. I mean, I know they don't want to trade away their core foundational their talent, but for Bojan, that's kind of the thing the Pistons are dealing with right now. Is like, for Bojan, what's your asking price? And I saw it too as a young player and a first round pick. I don't know. I don't know who gives you that at this point in time. I know he's playing well. I would much rather he stay because he can come off at this point. He could come off your bench if the offers aren't intriguing. And I think what he provides offensively is super valuable. But man, if you can get, like you said, a young player that has a ton of upside, I know people are sick of hearing it, but it's true. And a late first round pick that we've seen what Troy can do with it. Yeah,
even if New York calls it today and they're like, hey, we'll give you Quentin Grimes and a first round pick for Bojan Bogdanovich. Are you telling me that's unrealistic?
Yep, knowing what he's done with first round picks and Quentin Grimes, another great 3-point shooter with upside. Yeah. I think people would be okay with that.
Again, I just think people like put too much stress on the word good player. Like it's not like they're looking for OG Anunoby and a first round pick for Bojan. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're not. Yeah.
Whereas with Alec Burks, it sounds like, even though the Pistons, would consider listening to offers, and I'm sure teams will be interested, especially just because of the 3-point shooting that he brings. It does sound like Detroit believes that they would have a pretty good chance of retaining him in the offseason. And in my opinion, if he just keeps shooting the way that he's been shooting, and if we just see him, like being the player that he's been, we know that I know that run that he had, especially in like November and like October, like where he was just like couldn't buy a shot, was just like miserable. But like the way that he was resilient and got out of that shooting slump and where he is now just shows you why he's so valuable and why he's as good of a shooter as he is.
Yeah, he's a true professional. I love Alec Burks, man. And even if you're at a point now where you need to be selling to some extent to be buying to try and or selling to try and buy, Alec Burks is a guy that I just don't want to get rid of. Like, yeah, and I know he is all, if we're talking Bojan, then of course you have to include Alec, another guy that the contenders are going to want. But man, like what he provides off the bench, like I'm comfortable with trading Bojan because you have Alec Burks. Like so that's where I'm at. So if you're trading an Alec Burks and a Bojan, like you lose your two best 3-point shooters on the roster, it's concerning. So for me, preferably you get to keep a guy like Alec Burks. I don't know what his intentions are, where he wants to go, or if he wants to stay or he wants to be traded. But man, Alec Burks, that's a guy that you just every team he could fit in on any roster, any scheme, any situation, and he'd flourish. That's the
Yep.
type of guy he is, and that's why I love Alec Burks so much, man. And he's not old either. I mean, he's like, what is he, 30, 31 maybe? He's not older, so he could be around for a couple of years. We'll see what they do with him.
Well, and I think the only other player that really might have some significant value that is kind of a veteran, but also is kind of one of those young pieces as well, is Isaiah Stewart. And he's on, he's on that mid-level exception contract, which, listen, at this point, if you don't think he's earned that contract, I just think you have a vendetta against Isaiah Stewart. Like, he is objectively proven his worth this season, in my opinion. But on top of that, like, we know that teams like the Celtics have expressed interest. Teams like the Thunder have expressed interest. I'm sure even Golden State, who's looking to like make some changes, will look. Like, I know they've been interested at one point, in a guy like Isaiah Stewart. Could he maybe be a guy to watch at the trade deadline as well? Because if you are looking at, again, guys who could potentially get Detroit more assets, guys that potentially could be of value to more teams. I know Troy loves Isaiah Stewart, and before this season, it would have been really hard to see him be moved. But like you said, man, desperation calls, and as much as we like him, he's just not filling that need at the 4 right now.
No, he's not. And it's funny because I had this conversation with a couple buddies of mine. Excuse me. And the biggest argument for them was, man, Isaiah Stewart, he's just not it. Like I agreed, hey, he's not going to be a starter when you're winning a ton of games. Turns out he's not really a starter even when you're not winning a ton of games, but that's not the point. But they gave him a contract extension, and it's you can trade it. You can trade that, and I think contenders would welcome a guy like Isaiah Stewart. It's funny because even if, quote, he stinks, the Boston Celtics and these good organizations want him. So it's weird how that works. But I think Isaiah, if you're talking about a young piece for an organization that is on the market, like you will be okay with trading, it would have to be him. Like, right, it's not your core 4. Love Stewart, but like you said, desperation calls. And if you got to get a deal done and you're trading a bogey and you're going to have to throw in an Isaiah Stewart, and maybe some other players, who knows, to try and get somebody, you're just going to have to do it. And it allows you to, match some contracts, get them, any contender would love an Isaiah Stewart off their bench. And I think if you're looking at the future, he's not going to be a starter when you're at the top anyway. So it's just the reality where you're at. I know it sucks to see a guy like that go. He represents the city, but at the end of the day, like, you got to get better. And I think the way to do that is to trade Isaiah Stewart. He has to be included in some deal. I don't know specifically what his value is. I know teams are interested. I would have to see what kind of offers they, what would it take for them to trade Isaiah, but he would have to be included with a guy like Bogey. If you could package those two, you might be able to get a decent player. I think there's some value there.
Yeah, 100%. And, and again, if people are like, oh, well, like, what can he, like, if you look at players throughout the league, I would argue Isaiah Stewart is probably the most effective at guarding Giannis of anybody in the league.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there is no stopping Giannis, but if there's any player that's shown that he can get close, it's Isaiah Stewart.
And piss him off a little bit too.
And if you're telling me that guy isn't going to make key plays in a playoff series someday, respectively, I think you're lying. Like, whether it's in a Pistons uniform, whether it's in like another uniform, I fully expect Isaiah Stewart to be one of those guys that we look at as like, oh, so good. What a glue guy,
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, yeah. And I mean, Jeff, like, ultimately, like, you could see too, it's like you thought, like, man, like, Detroit, this young core, it's like, it's really talented. They have a lot of, like upside, but I mean, you've just seen even how quickly, like, like the Pacers, man, like freaking Troy now gets to go see Pascal Siakam and Tyrese Halliburton for less than a Subway meal, like for a freaking $5 footlong, man. And on top of that, like, just, you look at Halliburton, you look at Mathurin, you look at Pascal Siakam, even Obi Toppin off their bench. You're like, they have some pieces, man. And I mean, it just shows you, just even a lot of the young team, even Toronto, like, I love what they've done over the last month.
Yeah, I do. I mean, look at the treasure chest of assets they have on top of young players that, like a Quickly, a Barrett, like the guys they have already. Like those are good young players, great young players, and they have a treasure chest of draft picks. So if you're the Pistons, like, especially if you're a Pistons fan, it's hard not to look at what the Pacers are doing, what the Rockets have done, and be frustrated. Like, I get it. Like the Pacers, like that is the ideal way to start from nothing and to end here. Now, they didn't start with nothing.
Yep.
That's also partially true. Not like the Pistons, they actually started with nothing, but you get a Tyrese, right? Then you get a Benedict Mathurin. You already have a Miles Turner there. You go and draft some great players that they are even coming off the bench for them. They have a good collection of young players, and then you go trade the farm for Siakam, which they actually have their first round picks, so that helps too. But look at Siakam's a perfect piece. Like in the Pacers, man, not only are they fun to watch, but they have one of the best pure point guards. You could argue the best pure point guard in the NBA. Like
Tyrese is special, man.
They're going to be a tough team to face, especially come post. Like that's going to be a fun young team to watch for the next handful of years. Handful.
I feel like they are definitely a team that you can look at, like, you know, that team should be looking at, like, how can we model our roster around theirs? This is a sentence I never thought I would say, Troy. I mean, Jeff, I'm sorry. I pod with that bastard Troy so much that I get
shout out Troy. He's a legend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, shout out to our guy Troy. But you know, when I look at like teams that the Pistons, you know, can potentially like look at to who can be a blueprint, like what are teams that, you know, have been in this situation?
Right.
I can't believe I'm saying this. I'd look at teams like the Timberwolves in the way that like they, you know, like they obviously it took, you know, a lot of grinding. It took a lot of years of losing, even some years of like mediocrity. And like even as previously as like last year, we were like, okay, but like what are the Timberwolves doing? Right. But like what they did do was they stayed consistent to building around the talent that they do have, the young stars that they do have, and actually let them see their potential, but also built a roster that both complemented them, but also complements the style of the modern league. I mean, you look at the Timberwolves roster from top to bottom. It's guys that can defend, guys that can shoot, and guys that can defend multiple positions. And it's like and you look at Detroit and you look at their versatility in a lot of ways, it's kind of like it's almost the exact opposite. So, you know, it's just you look at like what, you know, like if Detroit's looking at like, all right, who can we actually like look at as a potential blueprint of getting us out of this mess? I know Houston's a popular one people talk about, but like it might have to take a little longer. And that's why I look at a team like Minnesota who really had to play that long game.
Yeah, and it helps. I mean, I think Anthony Edwards, if you talk about the young talent in this league, there's a short list of guys like, hey, if I'm going to start a franchise with this player, he's on that list. Like he's one of the best already in the league. And then you have a Karl Anthony Towns who just went for what, like 50 the other night, he had like 10 threes.
Yep.
So he's been playing really well. The Gobert stuff, I know we made fun of it last year, but he looks like the rock defensively that they thought they had when they first acquired him.
And I mean, if the rest of the team's playing this well offensively, and he can, you know, like he can finally embrace, you know, like this role of just being that defensive anchor, it's just perfect. But you know, ultimately, you know, like I know like people think about the Timberwolves and are immediately they're gonna think of the dunks, they're gonna think of like Cat shooting the three. But you know what really makes them so good? And again, why I say they're a team that Detroit needs to really be looking at. Look at this defense, man. First of all, Anthony Edwards is elite defensively himself, but just this entire team is just swarming and suffocating and doesn't allow like a damn thing for Brooklyn to do like in this possession. Like how often does Detroit look anything like that suffocating or that threatening or you know like when you have like when you really look at what are the teams that actually win championships, it's teams like that who leave you like looking for answers when you have the ball in your hands.
Yeah, and that's how I mean, you just look at how the team plays in comparison to organizations that like the Timberwolves that are actually winning games. When you watch the Timberwolves, and I can't believe I'm saying this because again, we've been praising the Timberwolves, and we've come a long way on that. When you watch them play, and it's not just them, but other teams, but the Timberwolves specifically, you're just like, yeah, this is a team. Like this is this is a team that I think could make noise. Not only I know the regular season's one thing, but man, they're going to be a bitch to play in the postseason. Like the Pistons are. Yeah, I mean, you're watching them. You're like, yeah. Number one, they don't look connected. Like that's a big part, which I think youth has a lot to do with that. Like when you got some guys on the Timberwolves that number one guys that have played together for a while, but other guys that have just played in this league for a while, it's a little different.
Yeah,
but
a lot more established. People know who they are on that team.
Yes, and again, it goes back to what we said earlier. Like they know their roles. There's guys on that team that they know their roles. There's no question. It's not like, all right, a bunch of young players just figuring it out. That actually is that's what you're seeing when you look at the Detroit Pistons. It just looks like young players figuring it out, trying to play as a team, but there's guys with individual agendas at the same time, trying to figure out their own game, who they are in this league. Like there's a lot of soul searching that needs to happen. Like that's why you got to get older. You got to get older guys that just come in and be like, all right, relax. This is how we're going to do this. And the Timberwolves did a great job at that, man. They have a good mix of young players, and guys that have played at a high level in the starting lineup, not just on the roster, like actually starting on this team, starting with their starting point guard for the Timberwolves, who's played at a high level for a while.
Yep, 100%. Ultimately, again, I know people, are calling for heads right now, and I understand because when you only have 5 wins at this point in the season, when you've been going through everything you've been going through as a franchise, it is tough. It is, there are a few silver linings when you get to, like when you get to that point, you know what I mean? But all we know right now is, like all we're hearing is, as of right now, those moves aren't being made. And so at that point, all we can really do is look at what got us to this place and what moves we can make to get us out of it. And I still think if there's if this would be one thing if we were year 4 and we had no idea who could lead this like who on the court could like lead this franchise. It'd be one thing if our best prospect over a 4-year stretch was like a Brandon Knight or, like an Austin Day. But at the very least, again, like when you have guys like Cade Cunningham, like Jaden Ivey, like guys like who I still think Asar Thompson, can very much be. And I mean, Jalen Duren, the monster that kid is too. Like there's very much still an upward trajectory there, in my opinion.
And maybe we're crazy. But I do. I like
very well could be.
Very well. Hey, I'm not putting it past anybody. But I do. If you look, okay, Cade Cunningham, we love, right? You like Cade, I love him. Jaden Ivey, I love. I like what Jaden Ivey could be, but now there is a part of me that is real and says, you know what, if there is an opportunity to go get a star player, then yeah, maybe Ivey's involved in that deal. But right now, I like Ivey. I think him and Cade, there's still time for them to grow together. Right. Asar Thompson, I think it's unfortunate that you see the start of the season for Asar and you see the impact he was making to kind of now, like he's got to get back, and he had some good games recently. But he has to get back to being a key contributor and playing a significant amount of minutes. That starts
Talk about
there.
Someone who's really benefiting positively from Muscala and Gallinari.
Yes. Yep.
Like, because when that spacing was like a closet, he just couldn't do anything.
Yeah, and I think Jalen Duren, there's no questions about what he brings to the table. So I like the core. Now it's just up to Troy. It's up to this guy behind me. And he's got his glasses on. He's trying to act like he's Stevie Wonder, but he's got to lock in. You got to go get somebody. And save this franchise, man. And these fans, they deserve a winner. They do.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And Jeff, one last question before we wrap up this podcast. I gotta ask you about this incident that happened with Luka Doncic the other night at home against the Phoenix Suns. There was a fan that was 2 rows back behind the scorer's table, and apparently he said, "Luka, you look tired. Get your ass on the treadmill." And Luka's response was, "Kick this fan out of the arena. Tell the ref to get him ejected." And the fan, who spent like hundreds of dollars, like couple rows behind, just chirping, which, is something that you see at sporting events. I'm all for players standing up for themselves. But Jeff, maybe I'm just an insensitive prick. Unless you say something that's truly like out of pocket, I don't think that's something that's worth kicking someone out for, especially if you're a professional athlete and someone's roasting your condition and you're kicking someone out over it. Maybe if there's a little smoke, there's some fire, Jeff.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. For me, at least, it's soft. Like I love Luca, but at the same time, like there's what would Kobe, Michael Jordan, these guys do? They would hear that comment and be like, okay. Even Anthony Edwards, we brought him up early. If someone called Anthony Edwards, if they said something about Anthony Edwards, he'd look at him and be like, okay, let me go score the next 10 buckets straight. Like let me take care of business. That's how Luca should have approached it. Just to get the fan kicked out for talking shit, and he's an opposing team's fan. Like that's
Right.
soft to me, at least. Like there's players that have dealt with so much more than that, and they still like. There's some instances where Russ will speak out against fans, but they say some very
They're like,
things.
yeah,
But
like if
this,
you say something that's truly
no.
out of pocket, that's it's racially insensitive, religiously, or like about someone's family, like anything, like there are lines that you just do not cross. If you're just saying, "Bro, hit the gym,"
Yeah, that's soft as hell. Like, and
like
who is
I'm not
Luka to
saying
get a?
that's
Who is
soft, but let me get you some charmin, my guy. Like you
Yeah,
need multiply.
that's soft as baby shit, as some would say. That's what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Love
Mm-hmm.
Luca, but damn, you gotta be better than that.
Yeah,
You gotta be better than that.
100%.
Never stop
Clearly,
talking trash, people. Never stop talking trash.
yep.
It's what makes the games fun. I
Clearly,
think.
what Luca needs is just to be traded to Detroit for a very little package, so he can come here and get that toughness built into him.
Yeah, yeah,
Or
that's it.
maybe I could just dream. But speaking of dreaming, Jeff, it's a dream come true to be back with you, my friend, dude. This was a fun pod, man. Thanks so much again for making the time. And I'm just excited for, continuing to make content, keep doing our damn thing. But
Yep.
also, people, if you want more of these types of conversations, if you want more great content, go subscribe to Crunch Time with Jeff Ifrady and Booner. Go show them some love. You can even become a member as well. Give them all the love in the world. Check out their content. They're going to be streaming late at nights, but also have all sorts of clips coming out as well. So definitely a must follow, a must subscribe. Jeff, thank you so much, my guy.
I appreciate you, Sean. Had fun. Let's do it more. Stick around, guys, because we got a lot of content coming out. I'm excited.
Heck yeah, man. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode. Be sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that mother notification bell so you don't miss anything coming from the channel. We'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Make sure you're subscribed.
Peace.